All right. Well, good evening. Thank you all for coming this evening. It's a pleasure to be hosting an event like this. And our semester has just started, so we're celebrating lots of things right now. And to be able to celebrate Miriam and her new book is really exciting. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Valerie Nye. I'm the library director here at Santa Fe Community College. And it's my true distinct honor to introduce you to somebody who has been an important influence on my life in the last couple of years. As a person with grace, as a writer and a teacher, I'm thrilled to have Miriam Sagan join us this evening. I'm so happy you're here to read for us, Miriam.
Thank
For
you.
those of you who don't know her, she's a prolific writer. She's the author of more than 30 books, including her newest book of poetry called Castaway. Um, the book is a beautiful set of works about opposing worlds, including illness and health, the self and landscape, dry land and rising sea. And my favorite poem in the book is a poem that Miriam has said she's going to read part of this evening called The Librarian at Sea Level, which you will get to experience. It's a beautiful and haunting story about the last librarian and the way I'm reading it in the moments that the world is ending because it's flooding. Um, I've read it so many times and find it so touching. Miriam is a founder of the creative writing program here at Santa Fe Community College, and she also directed that program. And Miriam is a patient and skilled teacher. She has taught many students here at SFCC and in writing workshops across the United States. She's a graduate of Harvard and has a master's degree in creative writing from Boston University. So Miriam is going to present to us this evening. You can put your questions into the chat and I will collect those questions to ask her if that's how you would like to do that. Or at the end of the session, if you would like to unmute yourself, you can do that and ask the question verbally. So please help me welcome Miriam Sagan this evening.
Valerie, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with people who are very far flung and very nearby. So thank you all for coming. And thanks to the Santa Fe Community College Library and to its librarian. Again, I'm going to read probably for about 35 minutes and then, or maybe a little longer, a little shorter, and then we're going to do some Q&A, which Val is going to kind of be the mayor domo on, and we'll mostly take questions through the chat. So I want to start off with the longest and most complicated poem in the book, in Castaway, and it is about a library in San Francisco that's sinking into the Pacific Ocean. It's a kind of magical realism. It's a kind of a global warming fable. And it's also because I love librarians. So I couldn't sort of help but someday write some words of praise. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it's not just praise. Maybe are librarians supposed to go down with the library? I don't know. So I'm going to try to explore that with you all. Because it's a long narrative poem in many sections, I'm going to do a little storytelling in between and a little bit of an overview as I go. So this is kind of towards the middle of the beginning, if you will. The librarian's name is Sasha, and we'll find out a lot more about her pretty soon. The last librarian has a journal, but she doesn't keep it. She has a computer, but no electricity. For some reason, one weak outlet still works, enough for an electric kettle. She has flashlights. She has the captain must go down with the ship. But no one has asked her to stay. The librarian and the once elegant, now leaking library set by a park, a soccer field, a formerly crowded neighborhood, often under renovation as money flowed or stalled from City Hall. And this is San Francisco, the kind of flat part, the Richmond and the Sunset. But City Hall has moved to Sacramento. Soon enough, the small plane trees arranged outside it, like so many peaceful protesters, will find themselves leafless, reflected in brackish standing water. But maybe not just yet. The flat parts of the city flood while the hills rise, as if they themselves were huge ocean-going vessels, liners or destroyers, candles, canned goods, a camping cot, 2 changes of underwear, another shirt, another dress, a coat, and an umbrella. The last librarian takes inventory of herself. If she lacks something, she can wade a block to Mr. Vishnu's store and buy it for a good price. So the last librarian appeared to me as a character, and then other characters began to enter into this narrative. And Mr. Vishnu is both a person who owns a store and, I think pretty obviously, the god Vishnu, who's maybe the most aspirational character in the narrative because he's the preserver and he lives through chaos and anarchy and destruction. And as a person who's liked shopping in strange little remote dollar stores, I had to create a good environment for him. The preserver of the universe has been incarnated 9 times. There is one more time coming. Mr. Vishnu has run a convenience store just a block from the library for many years. It is small on the outside, but inside it is vast. Its spacious aisles contain a universe of things, from antacids to swimming pool noodles, propane to lipstick, instant ramen to pregnancy tests. The truth is, no one has ever entered Mr. Vishnu's store and exited empty-handed. You find either what you went in for and at a very reasonable price, or find something else you really need. Remember those soft fabric sandals your grandmother wore, black strapped or in beige florals? There's a bin of these. They are all your size. House dresses, temporary tattoos, Mexican cologne, the 7 powers of Africa candles, fast food, bamboo stalks, human, altar-sized Buddhas, plastic flamingos. We could go on, but it is better to visit. And Mr. Vishnu no longer uses the anti-theft videos, the monitors where if you considered shoplifting, your best self would appear and you'd put the item back. So we have a store and Mr. Vishnu's staying, but not for long. So now I'm going to let Sasha, this is probably the middle of the poem, I'm going to let Sasha introduce herself and sort of tell you who she is. Why is this a poem? I have to discuss that briefly. Should this be a story or a novella? I really tried. I really tried. But the only thing I could ever get, the only action I could ever get was the sea was rising over the library. And that started to seem more like an image than like the kind of conflict that needed a whole container of a story. So I thought about kind of the magical ballads and Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner and how fairy tales, parables, sort of the hallucinatory and the surreal can be told in poetry. So I wanted to connect with that there's a narrative impulse in poetry that created the container for my people. My name is Sasha. I am a a librarian. What passes for a spinster in the 21st century, that is to say, I've danced in bars with women and men and taken some of them home. That was when I had an apartment in a hillier neighborhood than this, but never married and, given the current circumstances, unlikely to have children. And she talks a little bit about how, she's a child or grandchild of immigrants and her complicated last name. And then she says, so just call me Sasha. That's for Alexandra. And no, I wasn't named for the famous library that burned in the ancient world, but I think about it. I do. I probably think about it more than I should. But there isn't much to do in my library these days. No patrons, no circulation, no internet, just the salt water lapping, creeping higher. I'd say about another step on the entry staircase a week. The ocean takes the stairs, unlike an impatient child, one at a time. So Sasha's starting to, I guess, feel the archetypical shadow of the library at Alexandria, which was in Egypt, the great library of the ancient world that was destroyed. So this is not the first time, and it kind of ties into Vishnu, the god's feeling of cycles. This is not the first time that knowledge has been lost in this way. The library at Alexandria. Like many things, it appears an illustrated children's book in the mind's eye. In Egypt, Already the imagination's museum opens, and colonnades, sarcophagi, the cheery painted tombs, a line of sphinxes, no doubt even under the Ptolemies, those ersatz Egyptians. Scrolls, of course, papyrus, the mother of our paper, scroll upon scroll, on which Aristophanes of Byzantium is the first to divide poems into lines, or Eratosthenes of Cyrene calculates the circumference of the earth. I enjoyed finding those facts. The story goes the library burned or was destroyed by marauders or civil war. More probably, it fell into decline, a lack of civic funding. The librarians exiled, retired, or dead. In any case, it's gone. The reading room, the Grecian columns, the garden with its lotuses and reflecting pools, the motto like a Facebook meme on a roll, an inscription above the shelves that reads, the place of the cure of the soul. And now a section called Reference Desk Questions, which is a direct homage to the Santa Fe Public Library, where at one time I knew many librarians, and they often talked about their many reference questions. Where is the bathroom? Does God hate me? Is my wife crazy? I'm looking for a book, it's red, about this size. Do you have it? Was Sappho's work destroyed along with the library at Alexandria? No. Because she loved girls, Pope Gregory VII ordered all her works burned in 1073. Some say this was both in Rome and Constantinople. Some people call this an unsupported claim. What is left is often a grammarian's example buried in another work. Why did Sappho leap into the sea? She didn't. Would Sappho go out with me if she were alive today? I'm just repeating gossip, and why not? That beautiful person, boy or girl sitting next to you, they resemble a god. And that's a little bit of a Sappho poem, also translated by Catullus into Latin. It's so sweet. I want to tell you what it is. It's like, it's not about like how beautiful the beloved is. It says that the person who gets to sit next to the beloved is like a god. So it's a little bit of jealousy, a little bit of glamour, and we don't have a lot of Sappho, but we have that. So I thought I'd put it in. Mr. Vishnu departs. It's time to leave. With a wave of his hand, the entire store vanishes, including the building. It becomes a piece of paper that he folds a few times and puts in his pocket. He can open it back up later if he wants to store somewhere else. Mr. Vishnu gets in the rowboat and rows to find Sasha at her library. When he calls, she appears at the top of the stairs, her hair untidy, her ratty pair of jeans sag. She's losing weight. Mr. Vishnu remembers veiled women walking down the steps of the Ghat into the sacred Ganges at dawn. He remembers a lot of other things too, some less picturesque. Come on, Sasha, he says, it's time, let's go. Look, I've got another set of oars. She shakes her head no. Just as he suspected, they say their goodbyes. Once out of sight, Mr. Vishnu releases the oars he isn't using. They float away from the boat like garlands of marigolds or human ash. And I'm going to read you the last two sections of the poem. The last one sort of tells you the inevitable fate of the library and the librarian. And then the final section, which was kind of an epilogue, is more like pulling the camera back and more of a lyric poem about water and coasts. The companions. The salt water is so high now, there is no place to lie down in the library. The bottom shelves of books are sodden, and some volumes have started to float away. These aren't exactly messages of civilization in a bottle, but rather good night moon, some fat romances, and a manual about how to install electrical wiring. Sasha doesn't think she's going to start War and Peace at this moment. She looks for a Regency novel with crisscrossed couples or a slightly dull but soothing story set in an English village, but fails to find distraction. What she really needs, but knows she cannot find because it has not yet been written, is the amphibious How to Turn Into a Mermaid. And the last section, Sumi. Marshland with its tidal weather, cattail rushes, 1,000 miles of coast. Suminagashi swept by white egret feather, a hallucination, bird smell of that like the aura for migraine or seizure, a sense of doom. The brush is loaded with black ground ink, a softer shade that might be clouds towards rain, Like landscape painting at its most mundane, still every stroke is difficult. The circle has a gap. That gap is thought. You thought you'd had enough of that. Proved wrong again. The fog drifts in. So Mr. Vishnu goes to see his wife in Sacramento. Sasha goes down with the library. I think, there's always an issue for poets in particular right now in terms of ecological destruction, climate change. Everybody already knows the facts, and either they agree with them and believe them or they ignore them. No poem is going to really change that. But poetry is about the close observation of the natural world to some extent. And so when you observe, you see change. I've been hearing about this actually all over the world from haiku poets for whom spring meant one thing 25 years ago. It means a different thing today. So I've always admired writers who can do like really big major things. Ellen Gilchrist took down the Bay Bridge in a short story of hers and stranded her heroine on it. And I was so impressed. I was as impressed as if she'd done it with a hammer. She did it with an earthquake. So moving things around is kind of laborious, even for a writer. But first this vision came to me, and then I let it roll where it wanted to go. So basically that's that. I'm going to talk a little bit about somewhat different kinds of poems that are the earlier poems in the book and read to you from that. But I wanted to switch. Usually when you read from a book, oh, great, look, this is my book, it's kind of set up in order and I understand it and I can read from the front and then to the back. And today I was like, well, I guess because I was thinking of Valerie, I was like, I'm going to take that library out to see if it's the first thing I do. So that's what I was aiming for. So I'll talk a little bit about how some of these poems came to be. I have spent the last year dealing with sort of health crisis, confrontation with mortality. And I feel I'm not alone. I feel that practically everyone is dealing with these confrontations. And that's why I want to communicate about them. And this is called A Year to Live, ? It's also about a fairy tale. I might have a year to live. This world goes by in months, like a truck delivering packages. The 12 dancing princesses wear their shoes out each night descend to subterranean forests of silver, gold, and crystal. I've been dancing so long, I've worn out my feet. My soles are cracked and dirty, my ankles bare and bony. I can keep living, but only if at night I go down the trapdoor to the trees frozen and translucent. And of course, that's about the 12 dancing princesses, a wonderful fairy tale about escaping from your house without having to go out the front door. Like a planet that fell out of its solar system, I lay in the bed, rings bent, field of gravity askew, my gray hair uncombed in every which way. I plummeted towards something that drew me, a place without meaning or water. If I'm going to turn back into essential elements that comprise the body, I feel I should rest up first. It's almost dawn on my small city block where once I shone as a pilgrim. And of course, the planets are called pilgrims, and they do shine because they wander. They're also called wanderers. During a endless seeming season of forest fire about a year and a half ago, I went up to Abiquiu and I stayed at the Abiquiu Inn. I wanted to get out of the smoke. And I wrote something like 400 lines about how horrible this forest fire was. And I kept 6 or 7 lines. And I'm going to read you those 6 or 7 lines. Drought. You carried rain in your backpack, but it was too heavy, and the children were too tired to walk anymore. You had to leave it behind and carry them instead. Surface tension. This is my my philosophical existential poem, and it has ice cream in it, so listen for that. Surface tension. You are not in the fossil record. This daily life seemed real and unreal simultaneously. House guests left and the monsoon arrived. I lay in your arms and wished for nothing more. I used my imagination, the tiny girl said. Hummingbird moths startled us. There are borders everywhere. Sometimes it's Canada, sometimes the river Styx. I thought ice cream might improve things, and I was right. I've spent my entire life debating silver filigree earrings. I once had gills, but don't tell my lungs. I am not interested in the unknowable. True or false? The answer is a question, and the question, there's no answer. I want to read a poem about New Mexico. How can I ever write the perfect poem about New Mexico that tells New Mexico how much I love it? I can't. So I'm just going to keep writing them. And this is Santa Casia down near Bosque de la Patchley, a little hamlet that for some reason I think you sort of have to go through it sometimes if you're on your way to the Bosque. So a hamlet in winter, hung with laundry and long lines, not the equator's horse latitudes, nor the moon's sea of tranquility. Like a riddle told backwards, parabola of stars that fall into a woven basket full of wounded sheets. Beneath the constellation that unwinds like a dragon, I will politely welcome darkness, say goodbye, my heart, my lost Atlantis. As a child growing up in and outside of New York City, the image of a great city that got submerged, this is before I knew that it could possibly happen, was super haunting. And, if I had a nickel for every time I have the word Atlantis in a poem, I would be rich today, as they say. Let's see. Oh, I want to read you one about Tune Up Cafe. That's another thing that I need to sing the praises of. Tune Up is 400 steps from my house. And this is, nobody's asked me yet, how did the end happen in this poem? But even I am slightly confused by it. I'm going to read it and then see if I can figure it out in conversation. Where the crowded cafe fell away, and it was just the two of us across the table. Brilliant neon-colored globes of solstice hung from the ceiling. The door swung open, closed. We didn't know anyone. Unwrapping the tamale to find a tiny child carrying a pet rooster with burnished feathers who smiled up at us as if we were real. So again, I don't know where that came from. I mean, how many conversations have I had in Tune Up? Probably with half of you. And that quality of intimacy, right? But that quality of intimacy also leads somewhere in the imagination, right? It's like the closer you get to things, the more amazing and weird things really are. So, and I think that ties in with this next poem, which is about an incredible sculpture called Fallen Star, and it's on the campus of University of California, San Diego. The sculptor is Do-Ho Soo, and it was put up in 2012, and it is hanging off the engineering building, okay? It is a little house hanging off the engineering building, and you can take an elevator up and peek into the house. The house fell like a meteor, but didn't burn up in Earth's atmosphere, or even hit an old lady hanging out her laundry in Yuma, Arizona. Instead, it landed on the 7th floor of the engineering building at an odd but secure angle, looking down on campus with its hopeful, self-engrossed undergraduates. Once we landed, we set about cleaning up. Luckily, the green garden hose had survived the fall, along with the flower pots, and 2 mourning doves had nested in an unused bucket. You were there, and I was there too, with our usual quibbling, asleep in each other's arms. Best of all, 3 crows landed on our roof, cawing as if they finally realized we are all at home, here among the stars. And I think I am going to read a poem about New York City called Bridge, Tanker, Barge, Ocean Liner. When I was a child on the lower Upper West Side, I used to be able to sit and look out at the Hudson River. And I do think it's associated for me with language. Like, what were those things? Like, most people's, their first words aren't barge. but if you grew up on the Hudson River, it might be among your first words. I was looking for something, but I didn't find it. Not in all the boroughs of New York or fire escapes numerous as stars. I haven't taken a new name, not of my diagnosis, which in any case, no one has ever heard of. I'm no port of entry, although I was born in one. The sea goes looking for another city to drown. It submerges my childhood every day between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. This city, which like Earth has its own private satellite, is both a proverb and a fable of metropolis. Mircea Eliade, the anthropologist, said that the person who leaves the place they were born has to turn it into a myth. And with New York, it's a myth anyway. I didn't have to work very hard. I'll read just a few more, and maybe talk a little bit about them. But while I'm thinking of what to read to close, you should feel free to ask some questions. You could ask them and Valerie can synthesize, or you're also welcome to just basically, put them in the chat. And this is your chance to ask the poet, why did a child carrying a rooster appear in a tamale? I can't guarantee that I will know the answer, but you know how when you read, it's so fascinating, endlessly fascinating, but you're kind of filling in the blanks, right? What did this mean? Even when you read your own work, and I know a lot of you are writers, what did this mean? What's the connection? How's this coming out of the unconscious mind? What's it doing? So when you get to be in a dialogue with other writers or with yourself, I think it strengthens that connection between yourself and what you're ready to receive or able to receive. Does poetry come from inside of us? Does it come from outside of us? Will I ever know? Do I care? Am I maybe just glad to get it when I can? I think that's probably the most accurate way, which is, please come and visit me from wherever you are, and I will be happy. And this is a somewhat elegiac poem, but I'm going to read it anyway, called Postcard. I sent myself a postcard from the Sea of Tranquility, wrote, remember to tell my friends that I'm dead, in my loping, illegible script with my crooked, asemic smile. The postcard arrived late, years later, forwarded from address to address, from my childhood house to San Francisco's Rose Alley, to the Blue New Mexico mailbox where I purport to live, to the Shalom section of Memorial Gardens on Rodeo where I am going, but where have I been? Full of careless lies, like a red cape with a black velvet collar tossed over my left shoulder, walking around on Earth in medium-sized cities, talking to a crazy child who asks, what's the difference between a white crane and a pink dove, saying, yes, no, you're the one I love. That's a cheery ending, one that I can get behind. All right, I'm thinking, well, I know Anna's here, and so I want to read, I don't know if you have this, but it's like you have your own home turf, right? The place you were born, the place you ran from, the place you ran to. But then I have this about people that I know. So I can only see Tucson, Arizona through the eyes of my friend who actually understands Tucson, Arizona. So this is for Anna. I looked at the night sky to trace constellations, but there were no lines from star to star. This is not the planetarium, where a little arrow points the way. Back on Earth in Tucson, Arizona, I walked a neighborhood of alleyways marked with orange trees and ocotillos, but none of them had any names. If I was the mother of alleys, I'd call them Lost Wishes and Shadow. I'd name them Green Grillwork Door and Discarded Sneaker. And I'd admit that a prickly pear isn't as easy to draw as it might be. Of course, I'd change things if I could, but it is too late for that. The silver backing on the red Chinese mirror reflects and doubles the terracotta pot and its cactus, and hieroglyphs appear behind the looking glass that unfortunately I can read. And the this is not the last poem in the book, but the last poem before the librarian sequence, and I'm going to read it, and I'll tell a little story about it. It's called Adios, Adios, and it's part of a text installation that I've been working on. It's going to be printed probably on silk that's been dyed with local plants like chamisa, and then hung probably in some dry arroyos or dry acequias, and it's about water. So this project was at one time an application, a grant application for the city of Santa Fe, and it did not get the grant. And I'm going to talk for just one moment about editing. So it has a gangster in it. And, I was trying to get a grant for the underserved West Side. So my daughter, Isabel, who's the visual artist on it, said, take out the word gangster. The city is not going to give you a grant if you call anyone a gangster. So I took out the word gangster, and the city didn't give me the grant. So I put the word gangster back in. And when I say gangster, I mean the gangster that we all have within us. Adios. A coyote willow tree by the irrigation ditch. Sluice gates open on our days for water. What do the fan-shaped leaves say to their reflection? Vaya con Dios, vaya con Dios. Night shuts its eyes against daylight's alarms. Children sleep at dawn, tired from looking under the bed. Gangsters repeat this blessing, as does the sign on the state line. Vaya con Dios, vaya con Dios. Thank you all for listening and for being there, and for being part of my world, really, which is what, that's both the inner and the outer call to poetry. And so I'm happy to take questions and to chat in any way. Valerie,
Yeah, thank you, Miriam. This has been wonderful. And you do have 4 or 5 questions, so at least so far, and people can please keep adding them to chat, and I am happy to read them. And I just really like your challenge for me of turning Albuquerque into a myth. I'm gonna try that. Thank you.
That's so great. I think you have potential. Yeah.
So starting with the first question, how have you changed as a poet?
That's kind of like the question, how have you changed as a person? Or when did you become the person you are now? Or when did you become the poet you are now? I would say what I wanted has always been the same. I mean, basically, I wanted to be Federico Garcia Lorca when I was 14 years old, even though I couldn't speak Spanish. I mean, what I mean is a lyricism that's very transcendent, that takes the listener out of themselves and into the larger realm. So I'm not sure that I've changed. I think I hope I've improved and gone from being somebody who was very young and very witlessly concerned with herself, right? Like my heart is broken, you fill in the rest, etc., to maybe having a larger sense of connection or an idea of what the self is. But I would say it's been development, not change. But it's a great question. Thank you.
And let's see, a bit related to that, what advice do you have for young writers who desire a lifelong career in writing?
That's so much fun. On a practical level, I would say get a job you can stand that pays a high hourly, and presumably is not 40 hours a week. Ed Hogan, who was a typesetter and a small press publisher in Boston, taught many, many poets I knew how to typeset for what was a small fortune in those days. And I think those poets of Boston, they did well. So to not be dependent upon others or fate for your own security, to depend upon yourself. That would be, and to know yourself, to know what you need in terms of the material world. Otherwise, I would say, the oyster is yours. I mean, there's really only 2 things that a writer needs to do, and that's read and write. By which I mean, I did not say read, okay? I did not say the only thing a writer needs to do is read, because there are people, and you know who you are, who would just be very, very happy to read. And those people are called readers, and they're wonderful people, but they're not writers. So you need to balance, you need to learn as you go from reading, and you need to learn as you go from writing. Obviously, if you can find community, whatever that looks like to you. Is that one person? Is that 25 people? Is that teachers, or is that your students, right? If you can find community and make a commitment to not getting too lonesome, then I think you will do well. All of this is about not getting too lonesome or strung out. How can a person progress in the arts if they're suffering unduly? Human life is trouble enough. I wouldn't add other problems to it. I would say take care of yourself. And that's, if you want to be able to progress, you're going to need people around you who have your best interest at heart. I mean, it might just be simply somebody simple, like who loves your work, right? Or it might be a long dead poet who for some reason has decided to come and live at your house and help you out. So that's my best advice for starting.
That's beautiful. I think it's beautiful advice for being a well-rounded human being too. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, on to another question. Do you start a book of poems with an idea of a theme, or do the poems just appear and then you figure out how to assemble them? Is there a process for creating a book of poems?
That is a challenging question. And I think the answer is kind of yes, maybe. Sometimes anybody who's put together a book knows that it is not a straightforward process. But I can talk about how Castaway was developed, which is I got asked for the book by my wonderful publisher and editor, Susan Gardner at Red Mountain Press, who I also want to thank. And I was in the middle of a kind of crisis and shift in subject matter. I had written the Librarian poems, and I didn't quite know where they were supposed to go. And then I was writing these kind of long line, self-reflective poems. And then I was writing these poems that were sort of more about a kind of psychological emergency. And I didn't know if they went together, but they were written in a similar time period as a rule. And when I put them together, I could see where they overlapped and try to adjust them. I mean, it's weird, there's water rising in more than one poem, right? What is that? That's just poetic thought, obsession, intrigue. So, we could probably all talk forever about how to put a book together, but here's the sad thing. It's a rare reader who reads the book in order. I had a librarian tell me that. And you know what I said? No, I hate that idea. She was just like, well, get with it, because people pick up a book all the time and they read a few poems and they put it back down. So in a way, you could say the order is almost more for the writer's thinking and the editor's thinking than it is necessarily for the reader. So I'd say in a way, a pretty good job is a good enough job. It's not going to be the perfect book. But a book's not an object, right? It's in process. So I think that's all right.
Okay, this is a question about your New York poem in Castaway. The person asking the question says, I heard at the end that the city has a satellite. If I heard correctly, is that satellite the author or something else?
That is such a great question. And I can tell you a lot about that satellite. I'm so touched that somebody noticed, because it's a little strange, right? It is the moon. I mean, I'm sort of saying New York City is the whole world, or that when you're a child in New York City, you think the moon belongs to New York City, right? So I had this weird thing where I thought I didn't know there was a moon anywhere else, right? Until I moved to New Jersey, and there was a moon there too. So in a way, it's kind of like that pre-Renaissance idea of, the whole universe, the cosmology rotating around the Earth. Everything is rotating around. Also, I was very interested in Sputnik when I was a child, the false planet, the false satellite. And it's Russian, like my grandparents. And but I think the idea that the writer is the satellite of the city is a really great idea. And if you didn't get that from the poem, that was great thinking in any case. Thank you.
Okay, then we have a question about the poem Drought. You said you wrote 400 lines during the fires in New Mexico. How did you move from the huge environment to the tiny detail of saving children?
Well, I hated the poem. That's the I went to the Abiquiu Inn I went to Boots convenience store and I bought myself at 6:30 in the morning, you know, a bottle of very, very creamy and sugary coffee and a package of candy. As you can see, I was not in a good mood. I was very unhappy about things burning, right? I mean, certainly we've lived through forest fires before, but that had not made me inured to it. And I just like kind of lay in the bathtub and I just was raving, I think. It was not like this was brilliant works. You could almost say journaling, maybe, or timed writing. It was like an outpouring. And then when I reread it a few days later, I was like, okay, well, I'm glad I got out of the smoke, but that was not a poem. And then this just stuck out. It just stuck out like a shell on the tide line. And I was like, that's the poem. And then I just titled it Drought. So you don't even know that it's about a forest fire. So I would say that was like, it was double. It was bad process. I mean, like, what a bummer. 2 days in the Abiquiu Inn and 400 terrible lines. I mean, I wouldn't have said that was my first choice. But then it was also good process because something that was in the middle of it, not taken care of really or observed, was actually available. And my good fortune was I noticed.
Your writing process is so interesting, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your writing process. Do you write every day? And how do you know what to spend time on when you have been writing?
That's such a great question. I think the answer is I don't. Okay, so here's the thing. I like to write. You know what I mean? I don't know how people can really be writers. And there probably are some of you right here who have a very, very hard time. But I can't really do things that I have a terrible hard time with. It's like, I mean, I loved my job at community college. If I had hated it, I would have left. Sorry to say. I don't have a lot of tolerance for misery in terms of work. So I like it, I enjoy it, and I find it grounding. It's like to write 400 bad lines was soothing. That's kind of the dream, the back process, right? That's the dream process. Sometimes I get lucky and I realize I have a theme that's going to hold up for a while. And for example, in the spring, I conflated medical radiation and the nuclear history of New Mexico. And I went to Trinity Site and I read about Madame Curie and I thought about Oppenheimer. And that was a big field and things would start to come into the field. It was exciting. I would start to see my theme everywhere. But that is, maybe once a year, once every 2 years, that things are so heightened that they really work. Otherwise, it's just trying to watch the flow of life, the passing scene, follow the mind, follow observation, create intimacy. And that's, I think, in a way, the key for a writer is that there's like a triangle of intimacy. There's the self, there's the world, and there's the language, right? And that's, it's hard for writers to be separated from their mother tongue. And for people who have more than one language, maybe both of those languages are speaking to them. So for me, it would be English, but it's not English per se, obviously. So I think it's a process of enjoyably being committed to something, and I do like to write every day because, Val, that way I think I'm a writer. I write every day. No, but it might not be all that necessary or productive. And often, I like to write in bed. And my ideal writing spot would be in bed in a motel, someplace far away, which is ridiculous because if I'm someplace far away, shouldn't I be sightseeing? But yes and no.
Well, I love your description of intimacy. I think that is a really great word for describing the connection that writers need to have with the world and with activity and with people. So thank you for sharing that.
Okay, good.
How did you choose the title Castaway and where does it come from?
Okay, I might be wrong about this, but there's a shrine in Tucson and it's called The Grave of the Sinner. And I went to see it, and it's a very fascinating, magical, liminal point in Tucson where people put a lot of prayers around the shrine. And the shrine was essentially, nobody knows who's in it. Those of you from Tucson might have something to add to this, but it's some sinner who never repented, who was killed in a knife fight. That's the story that's around it. And he's also called the Castaway because he's cast away from humanity and from the divine, right? But then, of course, so is my librarian is a castaway, right? Because she's cast away on the island of her library. And also, it's such a beautiful word, and it has, I think, a quality of also getting rid of what you don't care about anymore, casting it away, or casting off, even in knitting and completion.
Beautiful. You have a couple more questions here. The theme of water is so pervasive. I'm wondering how that happened. In the Southwest, I think so much about fire.
Well, I'm not, I didn't move to Santa Fe till I was 30. And I grew up in large part on the ocean. And I also think water is just, very, very primal because it's our bodies, right? We were inside our mothers, in amniotic fluid. Life comes out of the sea. We all of the elements are very important to me, but I think being in the desert is what really brought. So there's a childhood of water, and then there's the loss of water and the identification with water. And so it almost becomes like overdetermined, got to have it, got to get into that swimming pool, in the second stanza somehow and kind of get wet.
Okay, and the last question I have so far, you can continue asking them. We have a couple more minutes to talk to Miriam. So the last one I have that I've seen in the chat is, do you have plans for more online readings in the future? Is there a cache of online readings from the past that you've done that you could steer us to?
I would say for that, just a Google will tell you. And this is recorded, so you can tell your friends. I'm going to be reading September the 7th, Jewish Women's Reading, which is also on Zoom. It's in Collected Works here in Santa Fe, and I'll put it on Facebook where you can find me, and always feel free to send me a note. But, Zoom, which was like a lifesaver during the pandemic, I think now people are doing more, some readings, live readings, some Zoom readings, but there's a bunch of stuff on YouTube. So I would say look on YouTube, Google it, and check, another thing is check Collected Works bookstore, because that would, in Santa Fe, because that would have all local readings that are going to be on Zoom.
Okay, I don't think we have any more questions from the chat. People can raise their hand or turn on your mic and ask a question if you would like. And I think Miriam has put up a good challenge for us that we might need to be thinking about what is in the middle of our next tamale. It might not be what we expect. I like that challenge, so.
The tamale.
Hi, Miriam. This is Sabrina. It's so great to see you, and I loved your book. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about myth, because I feel like there was this sense of you were creating a mythology out of the pieces of your life, and maybe even that little child and the rooster. It had a mythological, there's a certain weight to the myth because these are human emotions and it's very universal. Can you talk about how mythology informs your writing?
Certainly. I just did an interview with a writer named Tony O'Brien who asked the same question. And it's a question that's sort of in the air. I think, I don't really distinguish between myth and religion, right? Because myth is often actually someone's religion. But private myth, is that like a private religion? these are all, I would say, attempts to understand the personal situation in the light of the archetypical situation, the communal situation of humanity, and even, you know, sort of the quality of the divine or the the cosmic that's around us. So it is, you could almost say, essential to poetry because it's a metaphor. Things are like other things, but the things that are like other things, sometimes very mundane things, are like very magical or transformative things, and sometimes vice versa, right? So it's you know, in the Torah, in the Jewish Bible, there's the ladders between heaven and earth, and it's in a dream. Jacob was a wanderer, goes to sleep. Sounds just like New Mexico. Puts his head down on a stone. He goes to sleep and he sees these ladders. And the most important thing is that the ladders are going up and down, right? So that there's this flow between the different realms, the flow between different parts of the self. And, you know, I think, you know, as a child, I couldn't get enough of anything that was not about my situation as a child, right? Whether it was a fairy tale or, you know, a British children's novel, whether it was magic, whether it was ancient Greek and Roman tales. So you could say that that story really relieves suffering. It really loosens our grip to be stuck in some story that's not working for us. And so it's got a very transcendent quality. And it's partially, I just love it. I mean, I love it. I can't help but love it. But I think also it's very natural for poetry to take that path. Great question, and thank you.
Thank you, Miriam.
I had a question, Mir. I put it in the chat, but it just got lost. What's next? What's next? What are you working on?
Hi, Anna.
Hi. I love the tune-up story. Look at my tune-up cup. I love it. I love it. And I think I have something similar, but I'll tell you later. But anyway, but what are you working on next, Mir?
Well, I mean, thank you. It's always a great question. And it's always a relief to get asked that question. Oh, because when you finish a book, you think, well, this is it. This took 70 years to write, and I am through. So I like to have projects at different stages. But what's next is a little bit mysterious. I'm finishing a novella, which is set in a post-apocalyptic cult in Mountain Air. It has other things in it. And I'm working on some memoir, but in terms of poetry, I'm in a very much of a chaotic state where it has not gelled. I'm writing and writing, but I don't know, it's too soon for there to be an essential skeleton or meaning. And, you know, I do like to read as I go. I'll tell you something embarrassing about Castaway. I was reading Lorca and I was reading Transtormer. And so there's a little bit of vocabulary in some of these poems that is not mine, because I would see this word and I would think, ooh, that's a great word. And so I take it and put it in the poem. Transtormer has a poem about air controllers. And literally every time I read that poem, I think, I'm going to write a poem about air controllers. Why? Because I never have. So in a way, you could say I'm in the kind of like seeking quality, or it goes back to process or receptive quality. But this book, you know, came out in June. So there hasn't been a lot of time for the crock pot to sort of cook its ingredients. And
How do we get it, Mir? How do we get it?
Thank you. That's great. You can get it one of several ways. You can get it from small press distribution. They're on the web. You can just order directly from them. It's on Amazon. You can get it from Amazon, and I imagine also Powell's, etc. Or because it's with small press distribution, ask the local independent bookstore that you like to frequent and let them order it from SPD. And it's pretty quick. And thank you. That's a helpful thing to ask.
I just shared the link for small press distribution in the chat. So you can just click on that and get it that way.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to read your next projects. Wow.
Yeah, make sure you get them.
Good, good.
I have a question about the novella that takes place in Mountain Air. Does it involve a clothesline?
You were part of my first installation piece where poetry was hung on basically on a tablecloth. And I don't know, but it might harken back to, you know, there's parts of New Mexico that if they're post-apocalyptic, we wouldn't know. They look just like they would normally. So
Yeah.
you know, I think, you know, this is my concluding remark, which is like, you know, you go through your life as a writer, or I've gone through my life as a writer, and sort of geopolitical things have changed around me. And apocalyptic feelings and questions of destruction, and therefore questions of rebirth, are very much in the literature that I'm reading, in the conversations that I'm having, and what's around me. So I'm attuned to it. And but I think you can find that also in your own autobiography, that things will happen to you that then start to speak to you more profoundly, or you start to see them in other people and they speak to you more profoundly. So I think that in a way, I would say that my favorite thing about writing is that it kind of doubled my life expectancy, because for every day that I live, if I write, that's like another day. It's like you live again, right? You get to live it twice or 3 times or 100 times if you can't get it to work the way you want it to the first time. So I think that's sort of my concluding remark. Are we good, Valerie?
Yes, that's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming this evening. It's just been wonderful to have us gather in the ether tonight and share such beautiful work and observations about life. Thank you so much, Miriam, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks, hon. See you all later. Bye-bye.